I think we should start with the obvious big news, which apparently is America, and the election there. So, an election which seems to have been a surprise, or rather the results of the election seem to have been a surprise to many people. The fact that President Trump won all of the swing states. And actually, what's interesting about the figures, if you look at the figures, all of them are within the error of margin of error. So they could have gone either way, but they all broke for him. Of course, he won the popular vote for the first time, and I think it's the first time in 20 years that certainly a Republican president has won the popular vote. We know he'll control the Senate. We know he'll control the House. We know from his first term he's already packed the Supreme Court. So this incumbent president is an unusually powerful one. At least he starts from a powerful base. So do we think that is going to have any impact on? I suppose we can talk about global, but really we're interested in European and Hungarian economies. And do you think that and I appreciate that neither of you would claim to be an American expert, but do you think that hiatus, is that problematic when we're dealing with a troublesome world anyway, that we have a lame duck presidency until the end of almost end of January? Robbie, let's start with you. What's your take on the election now that we know where we are with it?
Thank you very much, Robin, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be back. I think coming to the elections, which actually I was following while in China, and I was looking at the development over the TV, and it's clear that, as you said, the predictions were that it's going to be a close competition. So I was starting to watch the news, and clearly, as the states have been announced one by one, the predictions were all going to Donald Trump, and all the swing states, as you have mentioned, ultimately landed with him, which meant that actually instead of the 270 electoral votes, he actually reached over 310. So it was a win with a big margin, after all, we can say. So it was a convincing victory, which we can say was coming in as a surprise versus the predictions. Now, together with the fact that the Republicans will control the Senate and the House, I think this gives probably a bigger room for maneuvering for the Trump administration. And focusing on the economic aspect, I think we can say also based on the previous presidency that Trump is unpredictable, but maybe there are a few points that are worthwhile to highlight. So number one, I would say, is that the US is the EU's largest trading partner, number one. The US is also the EU's #1 investment destination. So I think for the development of the European economy, the American policies have a huge importance. And I would maybe highlight just 2 points. Number one, regarding international trade. So what is expected, and I think there's a consensus that protectionism will be on the rise. We know that the president-elect has mentioned already that he's thinking about some blanket tariffs as far as Europe is concerned. And of course, with regards to China, he has also flagged a potential plans. So currently, the average import tariff to the US for European goods is about 2% on average. And according to the analysts, this could rise to between 5 and 10%. And when it comes to the Chinese average, it can grow from the current 20 to about 30%. So that is the, let's say, prediction or the expectation from the analysts. Of course, for certain product categories, it might be worse. So steel or automotive vehicles, for example, that can be even higher. So what is the implication of this on the European Union? So most probably it will negatively impact the GDP outlook, potentially already in 2025 and also, of course, in 2026. It might have an upward pressure on inflation as well. And it can also result in some countermeasures from European side, which again confirms the rise of protectionism globally. So this is something which is expected, and this can have an impact on the European economy, with Germany that is having one of the highest exposures to the US. And since Hungary has very close economic ties with Germany, I think this ultimately can also result in some negative impacts for Hungary. So this is one topic. The second topic which I would highlight is related more to investment, which is closer to my day-to-day activities. So with regards to investment, you probably all are familiar with the Inflation Reduction Act currently in the US. And so one of the speculations from the analysts is that President-elect might change the current regime of the IRA, might decide to reduce subsidies allocated to green energy, to electric vehicle or the battery industry. And I think this actually can be an opportunity for Europe because, as I said last week, I was in China, and 4 weeks ago I spent a week in Korea. And the current sentiment among the large Asian companies is that, especially the Koreans, they have, let's say, more limited financial resources than, for example, 2 years ago. And the limited financial resources they have, they focus more on the US because they have less competition from Chinese competitors. And Europe is not a very attractive investment destination at the moment. So if the IRA is phased out or is decreased, then this can be an opportunity for Europe. On the other hand, we also know that President Trump likes to make deals with countries, with companies. So one expectation or one probability is that he might say that if you come and invest in the US, then we will continue to provide financial benefits. But if you stay outside, then of course you have to be faced with the increased tariffs. He in fact said that he would like to see the European car makers become American car makers, meaning he would like to invite them to establish manufacturing locations. So those are the 2 points with regards to economic impacts, and I will maybe stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Robbie. Karoly, what's your take on it?
Thank you, and I would like also to welcome everyone. I hope you do enjoy the breakfast. Tell me how it is, because
you have a memory of it in the past.
Yes, going back to the election, I think I do agree with Robbie that it was a very remarkable margin, that nobody expected that it will be that determined. But I think one reason why it became like that, the popularity vote went also to Trump, because there was a very strong focus only on the swing states. So the Democrats had huge advance in California, in New York, and they didn't pay any attention to those states. And the polls and the results showed that one of the largest increase of Trump's popularity was in those states. So where it was not really relevant for the Democrats. So the popularity vote in this sense may be a bit not that important, but it's true that it hasn't happened for 20 years. And regarding the stability, so it's a very good news for President-elect Trump that both the Senate and the Congress has a majority of Republicans, but don't make that mistake that you you think about the Congress and the Senate, like the Hungarian Parliament. So those there are the members of the Congress and the members of the Senate also have their own agenda, and it doesn't mean that everything that President Trump wants would go through easily to the Congress. So just look at how difficult for the Democrats was for example, to make the tax bill, the IRA. Although they had the majority, still they had to convince their own congressmen. I do expect that the same will happen to the Republicans. You do remember how difficult it was for the Republicans to elect even just the head of the Congress. Because there were big disagreements within the party. So I do expect that if there is something very unorthodox proposed by President Trump, it won't be that easy to go through. But yes, that's true that it will be easier than if there were a Democrat majority. And regarding Europe, I also do expect that there would be so it's not a good news for Europe because of the protectionism. And if you look at the international trade, so what was between Europe and the US during Trump and during Biden, then it was and even for Hungary. So that was an increase during the Biden administration. Most likely this will decline. I still don't get what is their purpose with the electric cars, because we know that Elon Musk is one of the major supporters, but he would like to cut the support for electric cars. And they don't really believe in the climate change, so they are not supporting this. So it's and if they impose huge tariffs on, for example, imports from Europe and from China, then everybody should expect that there would be similar measures in Europe, which would be most harmful for Tesla. So I would be a bit cautious that how these things would evolve, because I don't think that Elon Musk's interest is exactly the same what Donald Trump communicates about himself. So it's a bit shaky. But in overall, I do agree with Robbie that the outlook doesn't seem to be good for Europe and for Hungary including.
Part of the job of analysts is, I guess, to predict what's most likely to happen, which is really hard with someone like Trump. But are we in a position where we are nearer a return to tariff wars? I mean, we are all of an age-ish, and we grew up in a world where business was supposed to be done along certain lines, and that we all agreed that globalization was a good thing. Trump doesn't seem to accept that. So do you think we're in a world where we return to protectionism, where we return to... I mean, certainly his politics seems to be protectionist. I mean, the whole idea about America first, you know, it's fairly obvious where he's going with that. He's not hiding. We shouldn't be surprised by this. But do you think, from a trade perspective, that the plates are shifting, and that we have to look at a different, less collegiate future?
I think we have seen this movie before, that what happens to global economy if countries start to increase tariffs, and also the reverse, that how it can improve the global economy if these tariffs are repealed. I think one of the biggest threat in the United States is that if Trump really imposes these tariffs, it will have an impact on inflation again. Because then, I mean, a lot of products are imported from China, and also there's a lot of components imported from outside the United States that are built in products and services in the United States. That will have an impact on the price. And if the introduction of new tariffs are aggressive, then it will have an immediate impact on the pricing. We've seen this, that although the economy went very well in the US, the inflation that it has eventually killed the Democrats. So I think it's a big threat for United States, and also it at the end of the day, it always reduces the competitiveness of a country. So it's a nice thing to say that, okay, we build tariffs and we protect our economy, but then these tariffs cause, as just I said, similar measures in the other jurisdictions. So then at the end of the day, the competitiveness of the United States is also reduced, which will not be a good sign for the economy.
No, although obviously it's easier if you're America to introduce tariffs than if you're Hungary, because size matters, apparently.
Because we are in the EU, so we cannot introduce tariffs on our own.
There is that as well.
Still, we are in the EU.
Robbie, EY, does EY have an expectation that we are heading towards trade wars, or do you say we can't, because of who the president-elect is, we have to really see what he actually does rather than what he says?
Yeah, so I will share my personal views on this. So coming back to the topic of protectionism, what I wanted to add is that I think independent of the outcome of the US elections, there is a rise of protectionism globally. And even if you consider the European Union, just to pick one example, there was a recent vote about introducing additional tariffs for electric vehicles manufactured in China, which actually means that there will be additional tariffs ranging from roughly 9 to 35%, depending on the car manufacturers, in addition to the existing 10%. So a car maker like SAIC from China is going to be faced with 45% additional tariffs in the EU market. So protectionism is also there in other places of the world. And interestingly, I think this, for example, can drive investment decisions as well, because decision makers in China, for example, are also carefully looking at which were the member states that actually voted against the tariffs. There were only 5 countries, so Hungary, Germany, Slovenia, Slovakia, and Malta. So maybe Malta is less relevant from a location selection point of view. But in any case, this is something they are looking at. And there's another category, the countries which abstained. So that is maybe a medium ranking in terms of possible cooperation with China. But these decisions will ultimately impact corporate decisions about future investment.
Okay. I want to move on from politics, but before we do that, there's a very obvious follow-up, which is it will come. It will be no surprise to anyone in this room that Prime Minister Orbán has been a very vocal supporter of President-elect Trump, and so he clearly is very, very happy with the result. Do we think that this decision emboldens Orbán and leads to, well, and what might that lead to? I don't want to put words in either of your mouths. So is there a benefit to Hungary from having Donald Trump in power, and will that affect the economy? We'll start with you, Robbie.
Okay, thank you. So speaking about the US-Hungary bilateral relationships, usually it makes sense to define 3 pillars of the cooperation. So there is the political cooperation, the economic cooperation, and the military/defense cooperation. And I think in the third area, even during difficult times of political cooperation, the defense cooperation between US and Hungary was stable and smooth, and Hungary has always participated and contributed to different NATO activities. In the latest State budget, the military spendings now reach the 2% of GDP. So even President-elect Trump can be satisfied with this level of spending. So I think the third pillar was always a stable pillar of cooperation. With regards to the economic cooperation, I think in this round and also in other forums, we have frequently spoken about the presence of US companies and also the large employment that they represent, over 100,000 people. I think recently there is a change with regards to the composition of foreign direct investment coming to Hungary. So whereas in 2014, the FDI stock from Germany and US combined reached 45%, by the end of 2023, this figure actually went down to 24%, whereas Asian investments have more than doubled, reaching almost 1/3 of the FDI stock. So I think there's a change in the dynamics, but of course we have still a large company and employment base. So when it comes to political cooperation, definitely the outcome of the election is a game changer. So from the bilateral political cooperation point of view, it has already been flagged both by Prime Minister Orbán and Minister of Finance Mihály Varga that they see the opportunity of making a bilateral agreement with the US. Now, we don't know anything about the content, but you might recall that the treaty on the avoidance of double taxation has been suspended / cancelled. So that now there is an opportunity potentially, which could be a good news for the economy, to put this back on the agenda. So I think there are positive expectations from this perspective.
Thank you, Robbie. Karoly, double taxation is obviously very much bread and butter to what you do. Is your expectation that it was flagged, I think, this week, that might be back on, or at least the potential that it might be back on the book. So is that something you would expect to see? And maybe are there other tax areas where we might see something coming out of this friendship?
Yeah, I mean, the termination of the tax treaty was partly politics. So I do share that opinion that if the president was Donald Trump, then that treaty would have not been terminated. But the problem is that bringing this treaty back is a very difficult thing. So I do expect that there would be. There was absolutely no negotiation and discussion on a new treaty up until now, and I do expect that at least these technical discussions on an administrative basis would restart, and even possibly the governments would agree on the language of a new treaty. The problem is that having a treaty ratified by a Senate is a very difficult thing, because it doesn't function like something is submitted to the Senate or to the Congress first and then to the Senate, and then they have just a majority vote, and that's all. In order for an international treaty to be discussed by the Senate, it has to go through various administrative steps, including there is a body in the Senate where certain senators, selected senators, are sitting in that council, who should vote on the acceptance of this that the Senate can discuss. Mm-hmm. And if any of the senators say veto, then it's blocked. This is what has happened in the last 15 years with the Hungarian treaty. There was a Republican senator who blocked all the international treaties, including the Hungarian, for certain reasons. I don't want to go into the details. But if this senator cannot be convinced, then it's over. And the problem is that I don't expect that the Democrat senators will favor the Hungarian treaty. Unless something miraculous happen. So this is where I'm quite skeptical. Going back to those very few examples when a country lost its treaty with the US, how quickly they could get it back. There were actually one real precedent, that was the Malta, and for Malta it was 15 years to get it back. So I'm not very optimistic about. It would be a very good sign for, at least for the economics, that we could see that, okay, there is a discussion and there is an agreement, at least on a draft format, because it would show the sign that there is an ambition to do something with this situation, because the current situation is really bad, that we don't have a treaty, we don't have discussions, and we don't have any timeline. But I would be cautious in making predictions that it would go through the Trump administration.
Let me ask an unfair question in that case, because why not? Let's assume that Trump and Orban are in agreement that this is a good thing. Trump says to Orban, "Is there anything I can do?" And Orban says, "Yeah, this would really, really help." I guess there's some visas, but let's deal with one problem at a time. So we have their agreement. If all the ducks are lined up, what would be the quickest it could go through, do you think?
I mean, negotiating a treaty is something like 1 to 2 years. It can be quicker, but this is how the administrations function, that they send a draft, then they get comments, then there is a formal meeting, then anyway. So I mean, it's not the difficult thing. I think if we can be, if both administrations find this as a crucial thing, it can be done in a year. A year max. That's not the problem. The problem is that the treaty has to be ratified.
Okay. All right. So with a good wind, maybe a year for agreement, and then I guess it's like picking the ambassador. That we can, all of us remember times when it took years to get an ambassador for here because one senator doesn't like it. It's okay. So we should watch. I guess the first thing to do then is to watch for those negotiations to see how they progress, to see what the kind of willingness is. Okay, let's leave the let's leave the US-Hungarian politics to one side. I was going to say let's leave the politics to one side, but I've just realized that most people will view this as a political question anyway. So we're approaching the end of the Hungarian presidency. Do we think it's been a success? And I know that's a very subjective question, but do we think the outside world will think it's been a success? Has it been overshadowed by ongoing Hungarian European Commission rows? Has it been overshadowed by Hungary's stance on Ukraine and or Russia? Did it make any difference to the Hungarian economy? So has there been a benefit out of it? What do we think will be the legacy? Will people look back at this and say, okay, they opened some chapters in terms of enlarging the EU. I guess that's a starting point. But is there anything we can draw from it that people will say, yes, this was a success that came out of it? We'll start with you, Robbie, please.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think judging the level of success of the Hungarian presidency depends on your point of view. So I will not probably go into that, but what I would maybe highlight is, again, a couple of points. So number one, so Hungary did host the European political community, which, I mean, for a fact was the largest diplomatic event in the recent history of Hungary. And we had 43 countries represented. Now, of course, you might say that this is not a success because it was anyway planned this way during the Hungarian presidency. And this format was established in 2022 after Russia's invasion in Ukraine. And it has 2 gatherings per year, and every second gathering is held within the EU country, which is the actual president. So that's why it was held in Hungary. But in terms of the participation, 43 is a good number. Now there are 47 members, so in theory it could have been a bit more, but I think we can say that everybody who counts was here. So that's number one. The second thing I would add is that on the second day of this event, or the following day, there was an informal gathering of the heads of EU countries. And during that day, there was a declaration which was accepted. It was called Budapest Declaration by the Hungarian leadership. It's a declaration on the competitiveness of the EU. And the competitiveness of the EU was the number one topic on the agenda of the Hungarian EU presidency. So I think alone the fact that there was one common declaration signed with this topic in the focus can be considered as an achievement. Of course, it includes lots of general statements about cutting the red tape and how to make the EU more competitive. But I think these are some of the facts which are part of the EU presidency. And then I think overall it will depend whether you look at this from a government perspective or from another angle. So that would be my quick summary on this.
Thank you, Robbie. Karoly.
I do agree with Robbie that it's a very subjective thing because there was a lot of politics involved. But if we try to remove the politics from this, I think it's definitely not a failure. Whether it's a success, you can't expect too much from a 6 months presidency. So there's a lot of things that are continued and they try to fix, and then the next presidency will continue and fix it. I obviously have more insight on the finance taxation proposals. And I do see that the Hungarian administration put enormous amount of energy, and actually there was a lot of success in that. Last week I had a chance to speak with the AmCham Europe coordinator, who goes practically from country to country when there's a shift in presidency. To understand the tax policies and other things, and he spoke very highly of the Hungarian administration. That he said that that was a very clear agenda what they wanted to achieve. They were very rational about their ability to achieve, and they were pushing hard. There is a VAT development. Obviously, it's not a land-shaking thing that impacts all of our life, but it was a difficult discussion at that initiative. That VAT directive almost went to drain during the previous presidency because nobody expected that it could go through, and then the Hungarian presidency was successful to turn it back, and now it has been accepted, which I think was a very, very big result, and I know that there are other strong discussions which might be very fruitful for. I think Belgium is the following. Or no, I don't know. Anyway, so it's
Belgium was one before.
One Belgium is and Poland is, Poland, yes. So it will be useful for them. So I wouldn't say that it. So I think the Hungarian administration did very well. Unfortunate that there was a lot of politics involved, and that overshadowed the performance.
As it tends to do. Thank you for that. Okay, let's move away from politics, and this turned into it's not happier hunting grounds. I don't think the Q3 figures were more disappointing than had been expected, and were disappointing enough that they tip us back into this technical recession. So. I guess what I'd be interested in is has your expectations for year end of 2024 changed as a result of Q3's disappointment? And maybe as we're here, let's cast it forward. Does it alter your predictions for 2025? Bearing in mind that presumably we will be starting in a less advantageous point than we would have hoped for. And I suppose we have to say, was Akos right in his prediction of 0.6 growth that he made back in January or February, I think, of this year? Karoly, let's start with you. Have your expectations for year end and for next year changed as a result of Q3? And I suppose I should also ask, were you surprised by the results?
I wasn't happy, but I wasn't surprised, and I don't want to create a competition.
That's such a Hungarian answer.
I don't want to create a competition with Akos, but I was also one of those who were not very optimistic last year. It's just maybe it's just my subjective impression from the clients, what we see in the economics and what their outlook is, that everybody was very pessimistic about the outlook. I think two things what surprise or actually alter the projection. One is that at the end of last year, it seemed that Hungary made an agreement with the EU and we will get the EU funds. And those funds finally arrived, but not in the amount, and they were not able to utilize it for boosting the Hungarian economy. And the other thing was the VAT. Or not the VAT, the consumption that the government expected, and actually it happened, that the wages increased, the inflation went down, and there is a real wage increase, and everybody expected in the government that will boost at least the consumption, and if the consumption is increasing, then that it will help the economy, and it didn't happen. And it's quite interesting why it didn't happen. Most likely because the rates of the government's bonds are still high, and Hungary is on a different policy in terms of government bond financing. So the involvement of Hungarian residents are much higher than in other countries. So the money was not spent on consumption, but financing the government bonds. So that caused actually some cooling down in the economy. But I think those projections that we have heard recently for next year are absolutely valid. So it's 3.4%. I think this is the latest projection for the increase of the GDP for next year. Is especially knowing that how bad this year is, I think it's a conservative thing. So I wouldn't be surprised if it was even higher, because this year was not turning out very well. Some of the big investments that the government has been waiting for years may be completed and start to operate. These large-scale investments. We also talked about last year that there was a huge increase in the FDI, but it takes time why this FDI converts into real GDP. And possibly 2025 will be one of the first years when we start to see these signs. So I expect a relatively good GDP. Where I feel the government was very optimistic is the euro half rate, where it's I would be very happy if it would be below 400, but I'm not that optimistic. And the inflation. So the inflation will be definitely higher than the 3.2%.
And can also be, I mean, the trend is probably upward anyway, but depending on what happens with tariffs, it could be markedly more upward than we are. Thank you very much also for the Euro Huff, because our CEO colleagues out there will be looking towards their skiing holidays in the winter, and they're always interested in that. So On their behalf, I thank you. Robbie, what's EY's take on what year end looks like and what next year might look like as a result of Q3?
Thank you, Robin. So again, I will be sharing my personal views on this.
We like
I don't know if there is an official EY position, but I doubt that. So just coming back to your original question about the Q3 GDP result, if you look at the details of the data of this minus 0.8%, there are interesting components because construction, industry, and agriculture would have driven down GDP by 2 percentage points. And the area which offset this potential minus 2% was actually market and public services. So I just wanted to make a point about these new investments potentially, coming live and start of production happening at some of the large projects, which is, I think, one important element. But if you don't have the orders and if you don't have the customer demand, then it doesn't help to have large capacities, which is currently the challenge, for example, of the European OEMs, where the capacity utilization is about at 55% on the continent. So there are a lot of unused capacities, which also had an impact in Hungary as we are strongly focused on, let's say, the new energy and the electric vehicle segment. So that was I think the story of the Q3 GDP. I mean, looking ahead.
Sorry, just to come in there. Were you surprised by the figures? Were they worse than you expected, or about what you thought was coming?
Yeah, I think I was somewhat surprised. I mean, I would have thought that it's going to be closer to flat, probably. Now looking ahead, and I think on the one hand side we have fresh data from the government because Minister of Finance Mihály Varga just presented the budget yesterday, which was also linked to the US elections, which as we understood and as he explained is a one-time effect because the plan from the government side would be to go back to the previous cycle, which means that by the middle of the year there should be a state budget accepted and approved. So yes, in that case, 3.4% is the forecast for the next year. And if you compare this with the data of the National Bank, the latest is from September. That is between 2.7 and 3.7. So I think this gives you a certain range. I personally also feel that probably there is more a downside risk than an upside potential in these numbers. But I think it will also partially depend on these tariff measures that we have been speaking about. Yeah, so that's about the GDP side of it.
Would you care to venture a guess on Euro Huff?
No, definitely not. I mean, unfortunately, I did not borrow the crystal ball from Ákos.
No, we'll ask him then. I guess so much of it is unknowable at this stage because we have to see what the start of the Trump presidency actually is. So when he actually starts doing things rather than talking about things or having people in his team talk on his behalf, and is that coming from him or not? It will be what it will be, and we can really just plan around that. But let's talk about elections now. I know that I know the next general elections here aren't until the spring of 26, and so people might say, well, why the hell are we talking about that now? The reason we would talk about that now is that generally, whoever is in power in Hungary the year before the election, government starts spending, and I suspect that that's happened ahead of every general election if we cast back over time since the change in regime. So should we be looking next year for the government to start loosening its spending criteria? And does that mean that since it also has commitments to bring down the deficit, is that likely to be offset or played with? Deficits are tricky things. I know we have the British ambassador with us, and the Chancellor ahead of the budget played with the borrowing rules, so that they could borrow more. So what do we think is going to happen? Should we expect a splurge of government spending, or are they going to stick to the deficit, maintaining the deficit, bringing it down? Or are they going to fall somewhere between those two stools? What do you think, Robbie?
Yeah, so the deficit target in the next year's budget is 3.7%. And I think there are some clear priorities set out by the government, so areas they want to focus on. So I think there will be an increased spend in some areas, but I think it's going to be kept under certain control, also because there is not that much of room of maneuvering from a budget perspective. So the priority areas will be support of families. So we already have heard about the plans of changing, the tax allocations for families. So that's one topic which will be a focus area, and of course this has a financial impact. The second area, which I think from an economic development perspective is interesting and relevant, is to focus on the small and medium-sized enterprises. And it has been announced that there are certain plans to launch new initiatives to support the activities and investments, especially of the small and medium enterprises. Here the challenge is, of course, to pick the right companies and define the right targets, because we know that this can have challenges sometimes. The third area, which is very much a focus, is defense and security. So I already mentioned the 2% spending on defense. And last but not least, this utility cost protection, which I think is an important political commitment, which of course has important budget implications.
Do you think that there'll be? You have the advantage on us in that you've had foresight for the budget for next year. Will there be? So when they came in, they cut back a lot of the building projects and said that that's not going to happen. Do you see any likelihood that any of those projects will be brought forward? The construction projects that the state was involved with.
I honestly have no information on this, but what I have just seen in the news recently was the announcement of the M3 highway construction project to make it a 2x3 lane, which was surprising to me to some extent compared to the relative cost and some of the other priorities that were discussed previously.
Thank you for that, Karoly.
So the spending has been started, actually. So as Robbie said, that the family tax allowance was introduced, and it was introduced in a way that nothing will change as of 1st January, but it will start to change from 1st July. 50% of the additional benefit is allocated for those 6 months, and then from 1st January 2026, so like 3 months before the election, will be the other 50%. Because the intention is practically to almost double this family tax allowance, but they don't do it in a way that they double it right now, but they give the 50% as of 1st July, and then so it's very much timed for the election. It's visible, and we will see what will happen if this is not enough. Because we have seen that, like before the last election, as Robbie said, that there's not much room for maneuvering. They didn't have any room for maneuvering 4 years ago, but they did anyway. So I do expect that. So it was announced like just a few days before year end, when the budget was already passed, and then they introduced this new measure that for the additional funds for for certain groups of people, and the return of the personal income tax. So it's I do expect that things will happen again next year, but we see that they are at least more committed to keep a relatively low budget deficit, because the government financing is otherwise not sustainable on the long run. And predictability, this is what in AmCham we keep telling to the government, that they should be more predictable. The Hungarian government, at least for the last 4 years, has been absolutely unpredictable. I think it has a definite impact on the GDP figures. What we see now, that the much less investments, less enthusiasm in doing anything, which may have a risk from a business point of view. It's partly because there's a lot of unpredictable factor. Still, we have this government decree kind of governance, which is, I think, very harmful. We don't have any. I mean, we do have problems in the global thing, but it's not credible that we sustain this government decree governance, because every stakeholder can feel that the rules can change during the year anytime. So it's very difficult. And if the government wants to be credible for the creditors, then they have to keep somehow the budget deficit within this 3 max 4%. Otherwise, they will downgrade the ratings of Hungary.
Yeah, so they have to be clever about how they spend and where they spend. Let's cast it slightly further forward from that. So I'm not talking about GDP in particular, but let's go to your specific areas of expertise. We know we still have these really unpopular sectoral taxes, which don't seem to have gone away yet, and you know, if they are going to try and finance extra spending, it would seem there's an obvious thing to keep that going. So what are your expectations for tax changes for next year? And Robbie, when we come to you, I'd like to particularly think about whether you think it'll be a good year for FDI, whether there is likely to be money coming in, and I guess for both of you, whether you see any likelihood that the public will start spending, that consumption will come back, because I wonder if one of the reasons why it didn't come back was that going through COVID and then going through inflation, people burned all of their savings. So perhaps there's an element of people building up their savings again, and they need to get back to a stage where they feel they can spend. So taxes, spending or public consumption, and FDI. We'll start with you, Karoly.
So in terms of taxes, one of our frustration as AmCham, and I think you also share this is again the unpredictability. So the government announced in 2022 the new measures would stay in force until 2 years, so they will be all phased out by the end of 2023. We see now that they haven't been phased out in 2024, and now they are remain in force for 2025. And there's not much talk about when they would eventually be repealed. And these are very harmful measures. So it's again, it goes back that how a company can be expected to make investments if even the short-term predictions are not or the promises are not kept. We see some of the sectoral taxes have been removed, and there is also a shift in the income of the government towards again the indirect taxes. So VAT is really the most important one. Excise tax has been increased, and by the way, there is a new element: this inflation following tax increase, so that if there is an inflation, then the tax of certain tax types automatically increase. So this is the case for the excise, and because excise goods like the alcohol beverages, cigarette, tobacco, and the fuel are composing 35% of the basket of the statistical office measure on the basis which the inflation is measured. This kind of inflation following measures will have obviously a continuous push on the inflation upwards. So it will be very difficult to combat against the inflation. So that's why I was a bit skeptical with the 3.2%, because I think it will with these measures it will be higher. But we see a shift that, for example, the transaction tax, which was introduced like 3-4 years ago, I don't remember exactly, but and it wasn't that significant in the budget. Now it's already 600 billion projected for next year. When the original extra measures were introduced 4 years ago, all these measures amounted to 800 billion. Now only the transaction tax is now 600. And the VAT increases, the excise tax increases. So I do expect that there will be sooner or later room for removing, terminating these extra profit taxes. But we haven't heard that what the timeline is. And on one hand, I understand the government; they're not very ready to share timelines, because they were not able to keep any of their promises so far.
Robbie.
Thank you. So regarding FDI, and I will try to keep this short in the interest of time, maybe just to put things into perspective, as I have been following FDI data for the past 10 years now quite closely. So number one, you have to know that Europe is not the most popular destination for FDI. So clearly Asia and the Americas are leading in the FDI domain. And Europe is number 3 to number 5 among the continents, depending on
how many continents we have.
In the competition, usually
we are
5.
ahead of Antarctica.
Yeah. So that's number one. Number two, although we speak a lot about automotive or battery-related FDI, if you look at global FDI, actually half of global FDI is either related to semiconductor industry or to renewable energy. For example, green hydrogen production. So what we see and what we talk about locally is just a small fraction of the global FDI in this sense. But what I do expect, maybe two things to mention. I think Hungary is facing increased competition with regards to investments coming from Asia and also China. Because although China continues to see Hungary as the #1 investment destination in the EU, clearly, and from a political cooperation point of view, the strongest, we have a lack of resources. So whether it's human resources, whether it's infrastructure or budget resources, and the Chinese players do understand this now increasingly, because they are getting a clear message that, for example, we are not looking for an additional huge investment in battery, just to give one example. So they are looking at some other countries. I mentioned the ones that were voting against these EU tariffs, for example. So I think Slovakia is going to get increased attention, and countries like Spain or Portugal, based on some of the conversations I had last week with some of the large electric vehicle or just car makers, for example. And I think the other thing is that there is also a change in policy with regards to economic development and investment promotion, is that number one, we would like to focus more on Hungarian companies rather than large multinationals. And also there is a stronger focus geographically on the southern part of the country. And from a content point of view, clearly it's all about R&D or high value add services jobs. And I think this ultimately will lead to a different portfolio of FDI opportunities, probably a smaller one in terms of numbers and volumes.
Thank you very much for that, Robbie. And just a speculation, because it is speculation. Do you think that consumption might start to appear on the market next year?
I do, because I think it should have already started this year. So it will sooner or later it will arrive.
So on the basis it has to come
and
eventually.
I think this spring economic projection is now conservative enough. So it's we'll see.
Okay, Robbie, anything last to add?
Well, to end on a positive note, the Christmas markets open on Friday, so I think consumer spending will definitely increase now until the year end.
So at least for the next month, if nothing else. Ladies and gentlemen, we're running slightly late, for which I apologise. Does anyone have a burning question they would really like to ask our two very fine speakers? It's okay if you don't. Okay, in that case, I'm going to assume that I had excellent questions and we covered all the ground. So thank you very much for your vote of confidence. It's always an interesting conversation. I mean, when you start to talk about politics, it's so subjective that I don't think there's much point in trying to sum that up. The elections happened. We're in an interim period. We will see what we will see, and then we'll have to deal with it. But I think, in terms of what's coming next year, I think the possibilities that, if there are tariffs, there are some opportunities that come our way, of course, depending on who those tariffs are slapped on, but that it might open up other potentials. It's interesting to hear that there are some people out there from AmCham EU, if no one else, who were impressed with the organisational elements of the presidency. So, it's always good to know that there are positives you can take out of these things, because we have to remove the politics from one side. The worry about inflation is a worry we all have, we all share, and I guess, again, we are victims to circumstance in that. But let's hope that the tariffs don't give us too much inflation, although that's something we have to worry about. We might also have to look at taxes leading to increases in inflation and becoming a bit self-sustaining. Everyone would look forward to seeing the extra profit removed, so let's hope that happens. There's going to be some government spending of that. I'm pretty sure. I don't make many bets, but the year before an election, I would bet that that's going to happen, and we'll see what kind of effects that has. Competition for European, or rather, competition for Asian investments is interesting. We will have to see how well they do. I sat down countless times with you, Robbie, and we go, oh, it's another record year for FDI. I suspect we may be coming to the stage where there won't be record years for FDI, but let's hope that focus on R&D does at least lead to real jobs and interesting careers for our people. And I think we'll leave it there. It's always, I think, helpful when we have experts such as these to dig into their networks. Both Andersen and EY are global networks, and that means that they have a not just a narrow Hungarian. I mean, obviously, I'm interested in Hungary because my paper is based here. You're interested in Hungary because your businesses are based here, but we don't live in a vacuum. So trying to understand what's happening on a European and a global level is very, very important for that. So I would thank both of you for your input. Once again, Karoly, thank you for landing at 1 o'clock in the morning and still finding your way here. Although I did get the idea that you were saying that you were able to use us as an excuse, that they had to get you back to Hungary. So you know, if we were helpful in that small...
That was much more efficient having the meeting because everything had to be done on Monday.
Well, then we're happy to have been helpful in that small circumstance. So, ladies and gentlemen, all that's left for me to do is to ask you to thank our two speakers, Róbert Ésik, partner at EY, and Karoly Radnai, managing partner at Andersen in Hungary. Thank you.
Thank you.